Hackensack Meridian Children's Health is comprised of 2 nationally ranked children's hospitals by U.S. News and World Report and are number 1 in New Jersey. K. Hovnanian Children's Hospital in Neptune and Joseph M. Sanzari Children's Hospital in Hackensack, as well as pediatric inpatient and outpatient services at JFK University Medical Center in Edison. With access to expert pediatricians and over 200 pediatric specialists across the state, Hackensack Meridian Children's Health prides itself on offering specialized pediatric medical care and surgical expertise. To learn more about Hackensack Meridian Children's Health, visit hackensackmeridianhealth.org/kids. Welcome back, everyone, to the Monmouth Moms podcast. We are here on this very cold June day. I don't know what is happening with summer, but my birthday is on Monday, and I said to my husband, thank you. I said to my husband the other day, this is the first time in recent memory that my birthday, I wasn't like planning to go to the beach or something. It's been a very dreary forecast, so I'm hoping that it changes a little bit and we get some sun and some warmer weather, right, for these kids just getting out of school.
It will come.
It'll come. Yes,
We
do need the rain. I know that.
I've had fall feeling. I was walking in the parking lot. It's weird.
Yeah. So today's podcast is presented by Hackensack Meridian Children's Health. We are continuing our family health care series. And today, thank you so much for joining. We have Dr. Kairys, Dr. Biller on from Hackensack Meridian. And we are going to be discussing a little bit about positive parenting, right? We keep hearing these terms about this new wave of an approach, right, to parenting, gentle parenting. I think you see a little bit on social media. I know that I've, definitely seen a lot of different videos and podcasts out there about taking, a different perspective, a different approach to parenting and how to de-escalate situations with your children when you are frustrated, they're frustrated, and how not to, take it to a level where, you're yelling all the time and it's a, kind of a negative environment within your household. I think, as parents, we've all been there where, you're in the thick of it, right? They say in the weeds, depending on how old your children are, and you're maybe don't have a lot of sleep, or you are working a lot, and it's just kind of stressful environment, and the kids are stressed out, and you don't want to be the parent that's always yelling. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to de-escalate situations, how to take a different approach. And with that, Dr. Kairys, if you want to talk a little bit about what you do at Hackensack Meridian and your background and what we're going to be talking about today.
Great. No, thank you. I'm a pediatrician. I'm at Jersey Shore, the southern branch of the Hackensack Empire. And I've been there for about 20 years. I was chairman of the department for about 17, 18 years. I'm board certified in general pediatrics, adolescent medicine, and child abuse medicine. So I do a lot of teaching. I run clinics and programs, do a fair amount of work at the medical school, very involved in community and community organization.
That's wonderful. And Dr. Biller?
I'm a child psychologist up in Hackensack University Medical Center at what's called the Audrey Hepburn Children's House, which is a regional diagnostic center. We provide, we're a legislatively identified center that provides education to the community about the impact of physical discipline, violence, the impact of aggression, and how to work in the area of preventing that. But we also do evaluation and treatment with children who have expressed or identified that they've been abused or neglected, and have been at the Children's House. I actually started in 2003, had spent about 10 years there, and then had gone to the Regional Diagnostic Center in New Brunswick, where I created and directed their graduate training program and educated about concepts from developmental psychology through specialties in child abuse and maltreatment. And I rejoined Hackensack October of 2019. So I've been up in the north, but I actually grew up in Monmouth County, so I'm very familiar with it.
What part?
In Marlborough.
Oh, okay. Dr. Kairys is in Manalapan right now, and also lived in Homedale, so we're all Monmouth County, I don't know, natives, but we've spent quite a bit of time here. Why is it the Audrey Hepburn House, just out of curiosity?
So the Audrey Hepburn House, before the legislation that was there to develop to, they were looking at building the center. Audrey Hepburn was very dedicated. For those who knew, she was dedicated to child awareness and safety and protection. When she passed away, she had a fund. Her two sons were running that fund. They had been in New Jersey, ironically, for something else in North Jersey. They're meeting with somebody, and they said, we'd really like to be able to, I'm making a long story short, is really be able to support something productive with children. And the administration at Hackensack said, hey, we have this small, the Hackensack, Audrey Hepburn Children's House initially was a small house with a couple rooms in it where we could do evaluation and treatment. And eventually they, as well, the fund donated money towards building the building we're in now, which is a standalone building on the same street as the hospital. Well, it was actually on another street, but now the hospital's grown so much it's actually still now on the street of the hospital because the hospital's grown over the street.
Yeah, I know the hospital has gotten bigger over the years for sure.
So they provided funding to build the building that we're in now that was specifically designed for kids to feel safe and comfortable when they have to come and talk about what's happened to them. So everything from the design of the building to allow more windows, it's shaped like an H, to the colors on the walls, the padded carpeting. It's really intended to be a safe place for children. So that's why it was called the Audrey Hepburn Children's Houses, because her fund dedicated funding to her organization dedicated funding to building the building we're in now, which we're very fortunate to have.
Oh, that's wonderful. So we touched a little bit on the term positive parenting. You hear also gentle parenting.
Mm-hmm.
I've been a mom for, everyone knows at this point and through listening to the podcast, a little over 19 years. I was actually on the way here and talking to a friend of mine about my guest on the podcast today. And I said, I definitely always the person that says, no one listens to me unless I yell, right? You can say it nicely 5 times and then I end up yelling. And I hear that from a lot of different parents, right? But you don't like who you are when you end up, like losing your mind. Everyone get ready. We gotta get out of the house. And, why is mom yelling? I'm like, what did I just ask you?
And half the time you don't even realize you're yelling because you're at that state.
I just asked you 4 times to put your shoes on, Oh my God, she's so mean. I'm like, and I'm not mean. So, I think we've all been there. We've all been in a scenario where, we're just super frustrated and stressed and pushed to the brink of just, quote unquote, losing your mind. So, there's lots of different scenarios with parenting. So what are some methods that you talk to parents about with, what is overall, give us a general approach of what positive parenting is?
Well, let's just take your point about screaming and yelling at your kids, right? So it's a pretty common thing. I think most parents talk, and don't do a lot of action with their kids. How many times you see families in the grocery store and they're yelling at their kids, you're not going to go to McDonald's. And of course they take them to McDonald's afterwards. So there's no action for it. So the whole idea about positive parenting to me is you want to raise kids to be able to self-regulate, to take responsibility for their actions, to be socially caring people. That's, I think everybody's goal, what they'd like their kids to be. There's nothing to do with whether they're athletes or superstars in the music, but it's how you are as a person as you grow up to be responsible. And that's really what positive parenting it's about. It's working with your kids in a thoughtful, constructive way to try to get to those goals. And there's a lot of ways to do it, but it can't be after the fact. You can't get angry and then after the fact get upset about that. You have to think about what is your job as a parent. How are you going to do it? How are you and your spouse going to do it together? Because so many times the spouse has a completely different idea, or it's you wait till your father gets home. And most people kind of parent the way they were parented themselves. What really happens. They haven't had a chance to really step back and as a couple talk about what do they really want it to be and how to do it in a way that's really constructive for the child.
Interesting.
And I think jumping off of both what you said and your example is it's the work is done to set the foundation. Just like anything that's productive or strong, the foundation has to be set before the individual episode. So in the example that you're describing is when you're yelling and screaming and so forth, you turn around and you're like, first of all, I don't want my kid to think I'm mean.
No.
I don't want to yell and scream. And it's after the fact, you're realizing, you know what, I need to do something different. So what we need to do is set up an environment that we're creating, as Dr. Kairys was saying, is we're creating an environment where we're communicating, but we're also, because communication, as I always say, is a two-way street. Mm-hmm. It's if you think about it, when we communicate, we say something, the individual has to interpret that, mm-hmm. they have to communicate back to us, and then it's our understanding. But that's going to be influenced by our emotions, one is how we're feeling in the moment, but how we feel about interactions and the dynamic between the individuals. So that's something that you have to think about. And remember that this new positive parenting or productive parenting or that we're talking about is a bit of a shift. And some people will say, well, come on, I was hit, I was spanked. Yeah. It's not that big of a deal. So the first thing is rationalizing, giving acceptance to, we're going to lose our cool. We're going to get frustrated. No matter how much we established a groundwork, whatever it is, there are going to be times where we are losing our cool. So we're going to have to say in those times, okay, I lost my cool, I've got this. But to do the initial work of figuring out what you can do for yourself to try to keep the frustration as low as you can. Like you said, there's so much going on. So you want to try to start at a level so that as it starts to rise, you're not starting at this level and going up, you're starting at this level. And we have to know that it's accepted within the community because it's difficult. So that aspect of it. And we always use the example of, when seatbelt use was first coming out and people were going to legislate that, is it had to be a slow roll of educating people of, why seatbelt use is safe and why it's dangerous not to do that. And so that's what we have to understand. What are the reasons that it's important to set a parenting plan, to discuss in advance? What are the reasons, the negative impact of physical discipline? And then talk about with your kids, what is going to be the repercussions? If this is the action, this is going to be the repercussion, and then sticking to it. Right. Because that's the hard part, is sticking to it, because it feels like punishment to us sometimes when we're punishing our kids.
Yeah, so my mom always used to say if she took something away from us and, if we couldn't go somewhere, especially because there was 4 of us, a lot of the time, like if one of us got in trouble, we couldn't go to a movie or wherever. It was like punished the whole family sometimes. Right. So that was, she said, this hurts me just as much as it hurts you.
I've heard that 1,000 times.
Right.
But, so is a goal punishment? So as Brett was saying, you want to be firm, you want to be consistent. You can't one day say one thing and next day do something different because they're in a better mood, or kids need structure, and they need limits, and they need things to be firm. But they also, you have to do it in the sense that you're part of a family together. You're not the ogre, the powerful, almighty, owner of the kids. It's an interactive process together. So, for example, there's what they call it logical consequences as compared to punishment. So punishment says you're going to do what I'm going to do. I'm the boss. This is the way we do it in our family.
Right.
But it may have no connection to the act. So they didn't feed the dog that day, whatever. So they get something gets taken away. They can't go to the movies, whatever. There's no connection to the actual act. I mean, to me, a better logical consequence would be, well, you don't get fed till the dog gets fed. That's the way it is. I mean, there's nothing like that. That's logical. It's based on something that actually makes sense to the kid.
Right.
The logical consequence for never putting, gas in the car when you have your parents' cars. Well, you don't drive that car for a while.
Right.
It makes sense. It's not. You're not there dishing out these punishments. What happens to most kids when they get punished a lot? They figure out how to get around it. They sneak, they lie. Mm-hmm. You're not teaching them how to be responsible. You teach them how to survive in that particular household. You're not teaching them the right
or
messages.
Or if they take something away that is maybe necessarily like the lesser of two evils, right? And they say to themselves, okay, well, I got my iPad taken away, but maybe I can still watch TV. Or
they'll figure out something else.
Right. Something else to entertain them. Right, and it's like,
water finds the path of least resistance. They're just gonna,
Right. So true.
I wasn't raised with physical punishment. I was raised with guilt, which is, I think, in many ways, a lot worse. I always used to feel guilty for not doing what my parents wanted me to feel shame. I think shame is one of the worst kind of emotions for kids to grow up with. It's very belittling. It affects your self-esteem. So we're not talking about, using something like that, but positive parenting is, again, about having kids have a role in the decision making as long as you are comfortable with the act. You don't just say, so you were out late 2 nights in a row. So what do you think we should do? You can say that, but whatever they say has to be something that you are going to be able to live with. The kids don't own their growth and development. You do. You're the parent. You're trying to help them develop and hopefully grow into somebody that you're proud of and they're proud of. So, but giving them a chance to be involved. I talk a lot with my families about once a week on a Sunday night, have a family meeting together. Kids really talk regularly with their kids. There's studies to show that maybe a teenager spends 10 minutes at most a week just talking with their parents. So everybody's in 20 different directions.
Particularly now with social media everything going on.
So have a family meeting where you can just talk about whatever and own and share and talk about what's coming up with the week and things that have been good or bad. It's you really want to build that ability to communicate and trust and just feel secure with each other.
Oh, I love that.
And some of it too is about understanding developmental milestones, because our expectations are going to often dictate our reactions. And oftentimes kids, whether it's young children or adolescents, they're acting in a developmentally appropriate manner in testing something, in growing in some way. And we get frustrated at it and see it as defiance. And, an example I use it for a young child is, when you have a young child in a high chair and they have food and they take it and they throw it on the floor and they look and they laugh. And oftentimes parents get upset and you get the feeling of that was done intentionally. When we look at it, the research is it's actually a developmentally appropriate way, not something we like, but in that stage, a child may be experience what we call object permanency, where it's the idea of when something is away and gone, that we understand it's not or it is, and it's entertaining for them, but there's also a reaction. So we have to understand developmentally too, at a young age, well, even as adolescents, kids like reactions. They feed off of that. So, if your child is throwing something on the floor, it may not be to really anger you. We have to developmentally understand, is that just their way of looking at object permanence? Is that their way of gaining attention? And if it's the latter, if we're looking to just gain attention, how do we provide that attention so it's not negative attention? So how is that going to impact their future behavior? And then we're going to look at modeling how we would like that child to react to something else that they're experiencing in the world.
Because actually a logical consequence to a toddler acting out for attention is not to give him more attention, scream, holler, do this or that, but just to walk away, just to not be involved.
Interesting.
The lack of attention is a consequence of bad behavior. And
so if you have, say, an adolescent boy who's maybe in 5th grade and he is acting out repeatedly, is that 100% always the someone that is looking for attention, or are there other different factors there? Because that's what you always hear, right? Oh, he's acting out because there's something wrong at home and he wants attention.
So here's what I say. Kids live in 4 domains. They live at home, they live with their friends, they live at school, they live with whatever activities they're involved with. If they're having trouble in more than one domain, then there's something going on with that particular kid that you really have to better understand. If it's just issue in one domain, everything's fine at home, but they're having a lot of trouble in school, acting out, doing all sorts of things, there must be something in that environment that's maybe has a dyslexia, maybe has something else going on. It's a sign to look a little bit deeper. So the first question is it something that's universal to all parts of his life, or is it really segmented to one particular area? That's the first thing to better understand.
Yeah, I 100% agree because I was going to respond to that as kind of a trick question because it's loaded.
Right.
There is so much going on in a child's life today that it's hard to understand. And one of the things that we think about is, an example of, a child who may be problematic at home. And, you go into school teacher conferences and the teacher's like, your son is phenomenal. He's always listening.
You're like, who?
And so the first
Right,
one,
exactly.
you bifurcate the reaction. First is you want to kill yourself because you're like, what do you mean? Like, he's a terror at home, but at the same time, you're so relieved that,
Yes.
oh, okay, they're good at home. So then if we're going to look at the problem, like anything else, if you had a problem with your car, if you had a problem with your computer, we want to try to separate how we're going to look at which system in order to affect some kind of positive change. So now we look, okay, he seems to be doing well according to the teacher in school, at least in her presence or his presence, and he's not at home. So what are the differences between home and school? Is it structure? Is it, emotional dysregulation? What is it? And then you could pinpoint a little bit more of the possibilities. But also, if you can, it's also important to reach out for assistance for other people who may know, whether it's a pediatrician, a therapist, or something, to try to explore where it is.
Right.
Because even asking a child, they may not know.
Yeah, they don't know how to help themselves, right?
No.
So they need to be
Even as
guided.
adults, sometimes we don't. There's
you
a
don't.
pervasive anger, and we can't figure out what's going on, and frustration.
Mhm.
And it takes a lot of exploration to do that.
And work, right.
There's also something called the adolescent brain,
Mhm.
which means that most kids till their late teens, early 20s are really driven by impulses. That's why suicide is such a big deal. They get upset and they reach out to do something that's destructive.
Terrible, yeah.
They don't have any delayed gratification. That part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, which gives us that ability to delay and to think ahead and to be more rational, it takes a long time to develop. It's not till early 20s, sometimes a little bit later,
In both boys and girls.
boys and girls.
And ironically, the research shows Piaget looks into this. He's in the psychology world,
Mhm.
and he was saying is only 40% of even adults have the ability to
Delay
truly
gratification.
delay gratification. Yeah, so it's very valid with adolescents.
Right. So teens are, and 5 minutes later they're over it. So again, with the kid that's acting out, how much of it is for just to try to gain some control,
Mhm.
some sense, most kids actually, if they're going to act at all, they're going to do it at home. It's in some way it's safe. It's a safe place to do it.
Right.
And so it's hard for the parent to deal with that. Most parents had this very happy 8, 9, 10-year-old would go anywhere with them, and now they have this kid that doesn't want to go there, doesn't want to be with them, is annoyed, this or that. So you have to be able to kind of step back a little bit. Most parents either take too much blame for what happens or too much credit when things go well. I mean, kids go through these stages, and your goal is to understand that, to see how best you can work it out together. Ask the kid, what's going on. They want to know all the answers, but they may know that things are really having a difficult time with this or that. Most parents think that kid must be on drug. That's the first thing that comes
Always.
in.
That
First
was
thing
always my
comes into
first
mind when
thought.
they
I'm
talk
like,
about.
what's going
Right,
on?
right.
What are you not telling me?
Right.
And there's
Terrifying.
sometimes it gets so bad the parents are like, and why aren't you sharing? Because you're killing me here. And
Right.
It's hard. It's super hard.
It
I mean,
is.
I've had, I've only raised one teenager so far, and I feel like I was saying the other day, I feel like I'm at the other side. He's 19 and he's starting to become what I keep calling a human again,
Yeah.
right? He's talking to me. I feel like he kind of came back. We used to be very close, and then once he turned I'd say 12 was when things really started to
Right.
become
Right.
different, right? And he wasn't like that. He used to, if I used to work in restaurants, so if I worked at night, he would go under the dining room table with a picture of me and fall asleep with it. He loved me, and then all of a
So
sudden he didn't
sweet.
love me.
But it's
No, he
And-
always loved you. He
it was
never
just he
stopped loving
it
you.
wasn't
Right.
that expression,
Right.
and it was so
Right.
frustrating. I
Right.
used to go into
Right.
his room and so we what's going on in your head, and you just look at me like,
Right.
what are you doing?
But what you just said, you asked a what question. I always
Right.
say with parents is try to avoid the why questions. Why questions are really difficult for kids to answer. You're going to get because I don't know. Or if you say, what are some of the reasons you're getting frustrated? What are some of the reasons? It's a little bit easier to answer. So, but a funny story I'll tell you about that 12-year-old age, and now he's 19. He's coming. So we're talking. A coworker and I were talking, and he's got now his kids are older, but he was telling me about when, unfortunately, when his daughter was about 12 years old, went to sleep, everything was fine, and he woke up the next morning and found his daughter was kidnapped. And he found that she was kidnapped by aliens, and the aliens left their daughter,
I see.
and he had to raise this alien. He said, and it was a tough job, but he said around when his daughter was about 21. She came home. The alien must have been picked up by her parents and so he raised this alien, and eventually his daughter came home. But he finds that experience that you're talking about is that, he jokes about it, but he's like, those teen years were really tough. It was like Dr. Kairys was saying, is you have this great latency age, early adolescence, pre-adolescence, where you could have almost like a different child into that time period. And we have to understand, like I was saying before, is the developmental nature of it. They're part of their egocentric adolescence is what's going on, and they're exploring their boundaries, and so we have to be able to work with that, and at some point, accept things that aren't going to be dangerous and harmful, and then set appropriate boundaries, because there's both a healthy loving kindness, and too much of that is not good, and there's a healthy boundaries. Too much of the boundaries aren't. So we have to see the relationship between the loving kindness and the boundaries and what works for that particular child.
Yeah. So on the way here, it's funny, my son came out of his room and he said to me, "What are we doing for your birthday on Monday?" And I turned around and I said, "Excuse me?"
You remember?
I could have, because I couldn't believe. I said, "I'm really not sure. It's on a Monday." Like, I don't know. And I was shocked. I think my jaw dropped to the floor, because there were years where he basically blew off my birthday.
So that was your gift right there.
That was, yeah. I said, I really don't need anything. I'm just happy that you're back. But I will say too that it took a lot to probably get to this point, right? Those years are really challenging, and I will say too, like, parents always say that you don't ever want to come off as the know-it-all as a parent, right? Oh, well, I had this and I know better because I already had a kid at that age, because every experience is different. Every child is different. But I always used to hear that, moms say, well, the older the child, the harder the problem. And it is true, because the consequences are larger when they're, when they start driving, it's terrifying. All of those sleepless nights when they're out late. And so a lot of that is, what can happen to them is far worse than what can happen to them as a 2-year-old. But I also think too, looking back now, not knowing what I knew, when I was so young and had him, and now with my daughter, though, and even now still, like at her age she's at, when they're little, like those fundamentals that you are, when you are yelling at like a 1-year-old to like stop or something, you just think they're not going to remember because they're little. Like, oh, it's fine. They don't even, or how things are in their world or their environment when they're that age. But to like explain a little bit about kind of the data that is coming out of the ramifications of not disciplining your child in the right way, even from an early age.
So I talk of, whenever I talk about the 100% what you're saying, there is a significant impact of what happens when you're younger. I first start off and ask, did you go to the bathroom today, by the way?
Yes.
Where did you go to the bathroom?
In the bathroom. So
what was the reason you went in the bathroom?
Because that's where you go.
How do you know that?
Because that's what I learned.
Do you remember being toilet trained?
No.
But you act every day, multiple times a day, on something that you learned that you don't remember.
Right.
It's the same thing with anything that our kids learn. They're picking up and learning things based on what we do, how we treat other people, and even how we treat ourselves. Right. And that's part of the fundamental part of positive parenting, is setting that example both for your children and yourself, to lay that foundation, to do what you need to do to keep your emotions as best as they can be. So taking time for yourself, whether it's we joke, but an adult timeout. If you have to get up in the morning and run before your kids, so that you could be at a better place throughout the day, or if there's meditation or something else that's working for you, it sets an example. And you also have to remember is, we rationalize, I'll spank them, they're young, but as they get older, then I'll stop.
Right.
That's going to have an impact, even if they don't remember specific incidents. Mm-hmm. As we used with the example with going to the bathroom, is what we do when they're younger has an impact and a memory throughout the lifetime. So.
There's a book that Oprah wrote with I don't recall who the co-author was, but it's What Happened to You. I'm sure you're familiar
Yeah,
with
right,
it. And it's really eye-opening, just the, how impactful trauma is on
Without
a
a
person,
doubt, right.
and like how, what an impact you can make on people by, putting them through traumatic experiences. So this is why it was so important to me to have this conversation today, because I think a lot of parents don't even, maybe realize like the impact that they're having on their children from a very young age, right? So we'll talk a little bit about the No Hit Zone program at Hackensack.
Yeah. So the No Hit Zone program is coming from a place where the idea is, like I was talking about before, is reducing the violence within the home, within communities, and changing ideology about the use of physical discipline. And a part of it came out of research out of Harvard that has demonstrated that even physical discipline, not illegal physical discipline of spanking and hitting, reduces gray matter in the brain. So it shrinks the size of the brain, the intelligence of the child. That usually gets you in the door with parents saying, let me hear a little bit about this. But the concept is, and also as we talked about before, is changing the ideology so that we understand both that where we came from in, as parents always says, oh, I got spanked and I'm a great person or whatever, and we always say, as the joke is, well, you got spanked and look how well you're doing. Could you imagine how much better you could have been doing?
Yeah.
But the idea is, it came out of actually Cincinnati Children's and Infant and Children Hospital, where they wanted to reduce violence within the hospital and the community. And they started putting signs up that says, no adult hits an adult, no adult hits a child, no child hits a child, and no child hits an adult. And the premise was, with an understanding of that type of behavior would not be accepted in that environment, they were going to reduce incidents of aggression in the hospital, which was high, and then move it into the homes, and that individuals, team members at the hospital, would make a commitment to nonviolence both at the workplace and eventually in the homes. That program has grown. It's now throughout the country. Actually, there's no hit zone programs throughout the world.
Wow.
With the concept of putting that signage up, but also now it's expanded to where team members, so at Hackensack, at the children's hospitals, we've committed to no hit zones, and the program is going to actually be rolling out in the next couple of weeks. So it's hot off the presses. There's going to be signage up within the hospitals expressing exactly the no hitting policy. All team members are committed. It's part of what we're committed to anyway, but attached to the no hit zone. But we're also making up packets with information about the positive parenting and the negative impact of parenting, as well as information about positive parenting groups that we're going to be providing, as well as distraction fidget toys that are going to be in these packets. And they're going to be given out to everyone in pediatrics at registration. And when a team member, a nurse, clerical, or someone else sees that there may be some escalation, they're going to be taught how to step in and say, hey, if you could just, if you want, there's some materials in there for, to distract your child, for your reading. But we're now expanding. That's the initial no hit zone program. At Hackensack, we're expanding it because, from our perspective is, if we're going to enhance wellness, if we're going to reduce violence in the community and schools, we have to give folks the tools to know how to do something in place of it. So we've created a 6-session model where it's going to be broken up, and parents don't have to be involved in child protective service or anything. Just parents who would like to explore positive parenting themselves can sign up, and there'll be QR codes, and on our website it's going to be available as well. And the groups actually will be starting in August as kids start going back to school and so forth. Schedules are difficult to do it now, but the first part of the groups are really going to validate us as parents and where we come from in using physical discipline. We're not evil people, we're not bad people, but there's some religious misconceptions about physical discipline or cultural understanding about it. So we're going to rationalize it so that we can say, okay, here's where we're coming from it. We're going to talk about the negative impact and how physical discipline does have a negative impact,
right,
the positive impact of productive parenting, and then we're going to provide skills and use specific examples from parents, and we're going to role play with that. And hopefully we also will build relationships with the family members who are in that group so that they could reach out to each other for assistance and build a community. Because it really takes a larger community for assistance, and if nothing else, to support each other and
Spread
say,
awareness.
yeah, or even if you're in a group with somebody else who can relate to it, and you form that relationship, you can say, hey,
Word of mouth, right?
my 8-year-old is driving. You remember we talked about this? What's worked for you?
This is really what happened to work for me.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right?
And then the folks here at Hackensack will be continued resource. So the clinicians who are going to be running those groups will be available via email, calls, or what have you. And the great part about this is we're not just doing it in the hospital. We've partnered right now with Head Start and Early Head Starts in Neptune, in Asbury, Hackensack, Jersey City, and Patterson, to go in to those centers and provide this education and awareness and create no-hit zones within those communities. And then those families create no-hit homes where they could put signage there, and kids and adults will commit that we are not hitting each other, we're not going to, and create a model for that. And hopefully the goal is to continue to grow this so that we could go into schools, businesses, and really help out in providing a resource in a non-threatening, non-accusatory manner of doing it.
It's a big issue. I think in the U.S., 80% of families hit their kids.
Wow. That's a staggering statistic.
It is. It's a little bit better than it was. It has gotten a little bit better, but
there has been a spike back up since COVID.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
The other thing is, when you hitting your kids as a process of parenting rarely happens in a thoughtful way. It happens out of anger. It's not like, well, when this happens, they're going to get a hit. Usually something happens, the parent gets very upset and they whack. And first of all, it doesn't really work. And second of all, if usually with enough force leaves as bruises, that's called child abuse when it gets to that point. There's one, about 30 years ago in Sweden, they passed a law banning physical discipline. And it's still enforced. There's some penalties, usually it's about a fine, but what it really did was it taught from the beginning that there's better ways to parent. And physical discipline in Sweden is down to about 15%.
Wow. Oh, that's incredible.
It makes a difference when the country supports.
They're all on the same page.
Exactly right.
Oh, that's so interesting.
The change of the ideology that we've been talking about. So.
Right.
And it's so true. If you think about it, is whenever you've hit somebody, or you were talking about even that you yell, is you never feel good about it.
Right.
You feel remorseful. There's a study, I think it was 2001 or 2002, it was a while ago now, where they took a large group of, I believe it was 200 kids in 2 different groups. Mm-hmm. They asked one question, and it was about discipline. It says, what was the reason you got in trouble? One of the groups were kids who privileges were removed, they were talked to, there's non-physical means of discipline.
Okay.
The other group, it was physical discipline, not abusive, but physical discipline. And they asked the groups, what were the reason that you got in trouble? The majority of the kids in the group that were disciplined, non-physical discipline, said, I didn't do my homework, I stole from my sister, whatever it may be.
Right.
A higher significance of kids in the physical discipline group said, my mommy's mean, my daddy doesn't love me, and they attached to the emotion of the aggression rather than the reason they were being disciplined. And some of the people responded to that article and said, that's ridiculous. I was hit as a kid, and I know it was because I didn't listen, I didn't do this. And the researchers responded back and said that's actually 100% accurate. You are correct. So if you want your children to understand why you're disciplining them when they're an adult, keep hitting them. If you want them to understand as a kid and change their behavior, maybe think of non-physical means of discipline. I thought that was an incredible series of research that truly we could understand that as a parent. So, well, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, interesting. Is there data that is shown that adults that become like criminals are also like, is that like something that you can connect the dots?
There's definite data that if you were hit a lot, you're going to use a lot more violence yourself as you grow up. So that, yes, being aggressiveness, assault definitely increases. But it's also tied into whether they have any sense of self-esteem, self-worth, because that also disappears. When you're constantly being disciplined and put down, usually it's associated with verbal assault too, not just physical assault. Mm-hmm. You're stupid, you're dumb, whatever. It affects how you are, how you see yourself as a person. Again, positive parenting is about trying to grow self-esteem, not decrease. It's not you are the you're the dictator of the family. It's
Mhm.
really, you're there to help support, parent, help them get to be as good a person as they can be. That's really your role as a parent. I always ask parents, is it fun being a parent? When it's not fun, I know there's something going on there that needs to get looked at. With all the work that it is, it should be fun being a parent. You should love being with your kids. You should have special times with them where you plan ahead, where you talk, where you get out, you have dinner together, whatever.
Yeah.
It should be something that's really part of the life of living together. If it's not fun, then there's something that needs to get looked at.
Interesting. So, Dr. Kairys, you mentioned before we started the podcast today that positive parenting is really mostly, a mindset, right? It's not specific things that you do in an instance. It's really just how you, I don't want to say your lifestyle, but how you live and your environment every day. But I would like to also give an example to those listening right now. If you have a 2-year-old, right, who is just, they say, even in my experience, 2-3 was kind of more tricky than 2, because they have more of a vocabulary, and they're little tiny little dictators, and they have meltdowns. What is one example of how to de-escalate a situation that's getting out of control, like in a store, for instance? You're in Target and your kid is on the floor screaming because they want the Paw Patrol thing, and you're horribly embarrassed, and you just want to melt onto the floor and die.
So, first thing, can you keep your calm?
Okay.
Can you avoid screaming and feeling somehow that the world's looking at you? Can you redirect? Can you kind of get them to look at other things? Get them to get their ability to stick with one thing is pretty limited, pretty small.
Yeah.
So get them to look at something else or whatever. Usually that works. I mean, if kids are really acting out so much and you can't, then you got to just leave the place. Just leave.
Yeah.
And to me, a logical consequence, you don't go back the next time to the store.
Mm-hmm.
We'll try it again. You always have a chance to do better.
Right.
But you're not going to go back next time. You're not ready to do that again.
Okay.
And one of the principles of positive parenting is the self-awareness. Oftentimes we react based on, what Dr. Kairys was saying is what is everyone around me seeing? So we panic, and we don't want everyone around to be looking. And what are they judging me? And these are all, thoughts that whip in and out of your head, and they're going to call Child Protective Services. You need to get up. So one of the things is you have to stop yourself and realize, okay, this is developmentally appropriate. This is a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old does this, and then go to the skills of, okay, how do I distract them? What do I do to get? And if I can't, then it is okay to pick them up, go outside, change the environment, and that too will help a child.
Here's another thing. I think we as a society don't do a lot to support each other. We have one of the problems with the reporting law is it's easy to make the call, then you can even do it anonymously. Nobody even has to know you called. If that's happening in a store, and sometimes just going up and say, "Can I help you?" Just that kind of support can be tremendously supportive to people.
Right.
People it does take a village to raise a child. It's not just one person. That's why in the extended families, the grandparents and the aunts, they're so important to the life of that child also. So, doing it together is so valuable.
So valuable.
And not to take offense, if somebody were to step in and say, "Hey, do you need some help?" They're there to help. They're not there to, we take that as a judgment. Oh, they think I can't parent my child. If you can use the help, take the help at that point, and deal with the emotion, how that feels afterward, because it'll help you de-escalate. And then you start to realize, this person has been in that situation before, and that's why they're coming to help.
Yeah, we see it in child abuse all the time. So the family's living in a hotel apartment, and the next door neighbor, all they hear is all this screaming and stuff going on. So do they offer help? No, they call the child protection. Is what they do, which is.
They think they probably are helping in that way, but they probably don't want to get involved.
They don't want to get involved.
Yeah.
Really.
Right.
Right.
That's interesting. So what about a preteen who comes home from middle school and they got detention for cheating or something like that. Your first instinct is like, oh my gosh, I'm so angry with you. Start yelling at the child. What's like the best way to handle a situation like that?
One of them is not to start off yelling with the child, because you realize is you're angry again because how it makes you feel, and you start getting outside of the moment and what that's going to be with the teachers, with the principal down the road. What does this mean? And so let's stay in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Your child engaged in a behavior for some kind of reason. And one of the things you want to do is you sit down with that child and say, listen, I get it. They're probably upset too.
Right.
They cheated for a reason. There was probably, anxiety about the test, whatever it may be. Then they got caught. Then they got detention. Then they're worried about how you're going to react.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a matter of being in that moment and asking the question, listen, or stating the facts first. So listen, we understand. You got caught cheating. You got in trouble at the school. And there's consequences. And we understand that. What's going on? Tell us. What was the reason? Start it there. What was the reason that you thought about cheating? Think, and not that the child has to have that explanation right now. Let's think about it. What are some reasons that you did that?
Mm-hmm.
And allow them to talk and go from where they are. A lot of times we go from where we are. It's sometimes the kids will give us the information when given the opportunity for them to explore what are some of the reasons they were engaging in that behavior. And then we could come up with a consequence from there that's going to make sense for where the actions came from.
Right.
But the consequence should be consistent with the school. You can't have a situation where you're doing this and the school's doing something completely different. You're a team together. If something happened at school, something happening at work,
Mm-hmm.
then your boss is going to be the one that's going to be disciplining you. If something happens at school, it should be the principal that's really responsible. But that principal needs to talk to you about that too, so you know what's going on. But so many parents actually enable the issue because they get angry too, or they side with the child, the parent, the school did something wrong, etc.
Right.
So the kids are very good about manipulating, playing the situation.
Mm-hmm.
They're better than most people are about doing that. So you really want to be in sync with the school for one thing. You want to understand what really happened. And you need to, as Brett was saying, you have to kind of figure out what's really the underlying issues that are at play. But it doesn't mean that you're not firm. It doesn't mean that you let them get away with it. They have to. It's a learning opportunity. But can it be a learning opportunity where they take responsibility for their action themselves?
Right.
And even talking like Dr. Kairys is saying, and he said before, is identifying a plan, but also being consistent with your parenting partner. So in this instance, whether it's a teacher, a school, a spouse, or so, if we look at adolescents, sometimes how they interact and use that as an example of parenting, we could come from a point of strength. And what I mean by that is if you have two kids at home, two adolescents, they will fight constantly 24/7 until they want something. Mm-hmm. And then they are the strongest bonds you will ever see, and they will agree. They may not agree 100%, but they're going to stick together to get what they need. That's what we need to do as parents too, is you as a partner may not necessarily agree in that moment of what, your spouse has said, okay, you're going to have, 3 weeks of no, electronics. You're thinking that's not possible, but you don't want to step in and say, no. We'll support your partner in that and come from that unified front. And then after, when the children are present, say, okay, let's think about this. How is that going to impact us?
Right.
How is this going to impact the child? Is this going to work? And let's see if we come up with something maybe that's a little bit more reasonable. And then together you go and say, listen, mom and dad, mom, whatever it is, we've thought about this. We're going to change and you come together in that. And similar to the schools, you may not 100% agree, but for the child's sake, to show consistency, you support that. And then if you need to go speak to the teacher or the vice principal because you disagree, do that on your own so that there is some kind of consistency and that whatever that punishment is has stability. It's not splitting.
Interesting.
And sometimes if you're really emotional, just take a break. Yeah. Come back when you're more with it and have thought about it some. Otherwise, you're just going to escalate it into something that's going to get into a fight. And nobody wins when there's a fight where both sides are screaming at each other and the kid's upset and throwing things or whatever escalates because of the event. So just back off. Sometimes I tell parents things are really bad, just go into your room and take 5 minutes. Just
Right.
take your own time out. Just
Right.
get reorganized.
I mean, how many times have you've seen a kid get a timeout, and as an adult, you're like, oh, I wish I could have a timeout. Do it if you wish you can. Figure it out and take a timeout at some point. You give yourself a timeout.
Yes, I have said that. So being on the same team, having a good parenting plan, enforcing consequences and following through with, with whatever the punishment is.
Talk less, act more.
Yeah, act more.
Understand developmental milestones and where they're at.
Right.
And start early. Don't wait till you're a teenager to start that. You start when you
build that foundation.
That's right. They have to trust you. Kids, everybody needs to feel like whatever's happening, they trust the situation. They feel safe.
Yeah.
They if loved. If that's not there, it's very hard to suddenly come in and start doing it differently.
Yeah. I will say that, all kids are different. I have 2 children who could not be more different in school and just their persona, really everything. And in the same house. And it's funny how they are they react differently to different things.
It's good to know that too, that you can't do it the same for every child.
Well, that's the thing. So what are some resources for parents, right? To take a time out, to make sure that you're getting that self-care. We talk a lot about on this podcast about the importance of self-care for mothers and obviously for fathers. And, for me, I mentioned before that, for me, that's running, right? If I don't run most days, like I just need it. It's much more for like a mental, I check in with myself. I just like listen, I talk to myself about, what's happening in that week and that month and, just overall kind of check in with, how my day's going. And I'm much better if I run. If I don't, I just need that. And they say that even with dogs, right? Like they need to be, they're so much better behaved if they don't get, if they get exercise. So what are some resources for parents, because some kids are more challenging than others, right? And you are faced with all kinds of different, predicaments and just things that they bring to you, right? That maybe you like aren't prepared for. I wouldn't even have known how to handle this situation. So there's lots of different organizations and resources within the community. What would you, outside of therapy, or maybe it is therapy, what would you recommend is like a number one thing for parents to go to?
I think, you're hitting on the important part of parenting is there's more than one person. There's not just the child, you're the self. Right. And parenting is about a system and how those interact. So again, you have to find what works for you, whether it's running. And to me, physical activity is essential. It's part of, if we think about even how humans have developed back before we had chairs and businesses and offices and so forth, the human body is used to moving. It's used to movement, and it helps build endorphins. It helps oxygenate the blood. It helps in all those different areas. So that's fundamental. Even taking a walk outside for 5 minutes so you could breathe and think. And also when I say is when you think is you don't have to listen to everything that you say to yourself. Sometimes we beat ourselves up. Right. Just because we say it doesn't mean we have to listen to everything, and we have to be aware of, okay, is this something I need to hear right now? Is this something I need to listen to right now? But I think that the number one thing to do is resources in general. And for you, if it's, physical activity, for other people, if it's a social group, for others, if it's family, for others, if it's therapy, religion, whatever it may be, it's individual, just like we were talking about for children. Find what works for you so you could better yourself, and then you'll be able to better pick out other resources, because there's a litany of resources on the internet, whether in the schools. But that's another good resource is the schools, is the guidance counselors, teachers, principals. They deal with whatever you're dealing with at home, with hundreds of kids all the time, every year. So they've figured out some of the resources. So that's another great place is the schools, because that's their second home. They spend just as much time sometimes there as they do awake hours as they do at home. So one is focus on yourself and what works for you and find those resources. And then 2 is reach out to those that are closest to the kids, which happens to be schools. And, schools are also the ones who see the most. They're the ones who report to Child Protective Services the most. So they have some really good resources.
I think, too, just the ability to acknowledge that, they say if you're doing things repeatedly and, it's the same outcome, obviously it's never going to change. Right. And I think a lot of people don't make the changes because they don't need more work to do. Oh, I can't handle that because I can't afford therapy, or I can't do that because whatever. But when you actually put yourself in it, it makes things easier, and it's actually makes the whole process better, right? In work, in life, and everything. And taking that first step, right? Like showing up and doing that, that next thing to make things better. It's almost easier from there. It's really just kind of getting to that point of making the change.
Right. None of it's ever easy.
Right.
None of this is easy. So you have to pick
pick your heart, right?
Yeah,
pick your heart.
which is your heart.
Right,
exactly.
right.
But don't go to the internet and get 20 different ideas and change it to next week. So you have to have some ability to settle on a course and stick with it. Having either it's a spouse or somebody close to you that you can talk to about this stuff, I think is really, really critical. I feel very badly for a single parent. They don't have the potential of having somebody else to do it with them. They're in it alone, and they need either a best friend or their mother or somebody to really help them. I think having support is really a critical piece for particularly for parenting, for raising a family.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming today and discussing these really important topics. I think we touched on a lot of different things, but I know, as a parent and so many parents listening right now, if you're struggling, or even if you just want to kind of improve and, just make things a little bit more harmonious and peaceful in your home, I hope that you took a little bit of what we discussed today.
Absolutely.
Also, I'm hoping to see more from the No Hit Zone resources coming to Monmouth County and being implemented within Monmouth and throughout New Jersey. So that's really exciting things.
And if anyone is interested in implementing it, whether it's in their home, in their organization, their church, synagogue, absolutely reach out to at the Audrey Hepburn Children's House website. There's information on it and how to contact us, as well as more information about the program. So.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you. And thank you so much to Hackensack Meridian Children's Health. We will link the website in the podcast here so you can access that and get more information about everything we discussed today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.